Audience, welcome to the show POWERchat. In today's episode, we are discussing about poverty reduction in Nepal with particular focus on livelihood, good governance and health system. Joining us today is Mr. Joel Hafvenstein, Executive Director at United Mission to Nepal. Please allow me to welcome him. Welcome to the show, Mr. Hafvenstein.
Thank you very much, Laxman ji.
How have you been?
I've been well, thanks. It's a beautiful day and happy to be here.
Well, you have joined United Mission to Nepal 3 years ago.
Oh.
How do you assess the overall development process of Nepal?
Well, I think it's a fascinating development situation in Nepal. I've been director of UMN for 3 years now, but I actually grew up in Nepal. My family worked here when I was a boy. My father was a civil engineer working at United Mission to Nepal in the 1980s. And so when I'm asked about Nepal's development, I think about the amazing level of transformation that has taken place in Nepal from when I was a boy to the present day. I think it can be easy sometimes to underestimate just how much development has changed Nepal. Here in Kathmandu, obviously, we see the built environment is completely changed. But in rural Nepal, the connectedness of rural villages is a complete transformation from what it was when I was a boy. The impact of migration, obviously, but also the motor bato reaching almost every village, mobile phones across Nepal. It's the extent to which rural people are connected. It opens up lots of new opportunities that just weren't there a generation ago or even 10, 20 years ago to the same extent. The social change that's come about through movements including Maoism, including the Madesh movement, again, the disruptive effect that's had on local social hierarchies, it's huge. And with all of that, on the one hand, there's tremendous new opportunity, and on the other hand, there's a great deal more risk and vulnerability. The old village society was very stable and very self-sustaining, it had to be. And it had a lot of economic poverty involved in it, and of course vulnerability. But the social mutual support networks tended to be very strong. And as those have broken down under the impact of migration, under the impact of some of the social changes, we see on the one hand, in every village in Nepal, there are people taking advantage of new opportunities that have come out of greater connectedness. And on the other hand, there's more and more people being left behind. People who aren't able for various reasons to take those opportunities, who may not even be aware of them. People who continue to suffer under the burden of social exclusion, discrimination. And to my mind, it's a crucial and exciting time to be doing development work in Nepal, in a country that has radically changed, to be working to try to ensure that the benefits of those changes reach the most excluded people, and that the costs and risks involved in those changes are shared as fairly as possible. It's an exciting time.
It's really interesting that you are born here, now leading important organization, United Mission to Nepal. What are the challenges, as you are leading the organization here, what are the development challenges before Nepal? Because you have seen Nepal at your childhood, now leading an organization that assists the development of Nepal through different areas, including that of livelihoods and health system, education and good governance.
Yeah. Well, I think the challenge is not in the capacities of the Nepali people. We see that all around the world, Nepali people are much in demand. The fact that migration has opened up so many opportunities globally for work shows that there's a tremendous capacity for here in Nepali people, and the opportunities here in Nepal to make use of that are not as many as they need to be. The biggest challenge, I think, of development in Nepal is of finding a way of increasing opportunities here in Nepal, livelihood opportunities, but also education opportunities, so that the tremendous capacity inherent in the Nepali people can be realized here for the benefit of the nation, rather than so much of it having to be channeled into migration in order to indirectly bring benefits back to Nepal. I think that in a sense it's a global challenge of how do we make development results more inclusive. All around the world we're seeing that the best ways that we've come up with to increase wealth also increase inequality significantly. They do leave lots of people behind. We see around the world political backlashes grounded fundamentally in that fact. So I think that Nepal faces that same challenge. Nepal also, of course, is facing the development challenge around how to structure itself as a plural society. And it has a lot of advantages in that. That the traditions of tolerance, mutual toleration, mutual respect, cultural diversity, and celebration of cultural diversity in Nepal are tremendous. And on the other hand, as with so many nations, the nation-building process of Nepal partly involved the elevation of a particular vision of national identity, and that's been breaking down. And so the question is, how can it's a political question, a social question, but it has economic consequences as well. How does Nepal re-articulate a national identity that recognizes that all castes, ethnicities, religions are equally part, all regions of Nepal are equally part of the Nepali project and moving forward together?
Well, you touched upon many issues that Nepal has gone through, many transformations, including that of social, economic, and political. But often there is criticism about the service delivery system of Nepal, good governance. And one of the components of your work here in Nepal is good governance. How do you see or evaluate the overall governance system of Nepal, and how can it be strengthened?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot of good to say about the service delivery system in Nepal and the governance system of Nepal. Again, taking the view compared to 20, 30 years ago, the extent of government services has greatly increased. And in terms of the accountability systems, governance systems, very often Nepal's written laws, written policies are world class. But the challenge is that often people on the ground aren't aware of those written policies and don't know what the government has committed to provide. And as we see in the rural development work of UMN, in some areas we see, in the remote areas especially, we see schools and clinics where the buildings are there, but the staff are not. And partly that follows from local people not realizing, not having an expectation that government, civil servants, teachers, health workers will be there, that there's an obligation on them to be there to be serving the local community. And in those cases, of course, it is fundamentally a governance problem. If you want to improve education outcomes in remote Mugu, you need to improve local governance, where the local communities are, understand what they're entitled to, and organize to ask for it. In other areas, we see situations where both local government and local communities may not be fully aware of what the process is, for example, of getting local priorities into the budget. And quite a lot of our governance work focuses on making sure everyone's aware of what the process is for having local priorities heard and translated into action. And out of that then comes tremendous impact, more effective use of government funds that have been committed, but that previously, because people didn't know how to access them or even that they were there, they weren't being properly used. In some cases, of course, you have rural schools and rural clinics where the staff are there, but they struggle to fulfill certain aspects of the job. Many teachers aren't fully trained. Many health post workers aren't familiar with mental health, for example, which is a massive challenge across Nepal and across the world. And so a significant amount of UMN's work is accompanying and supporting government schools, government teachers, government clinic workers to help strengthen their capacities in those areas where it makes a significant difference in their ability to deliver the service as well.
Well, could you also highlight the other major works of United Mission to Nepal here in Nepal?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, essentially, UMN works these days with 40 local NGO partners across the country in 10 districts, 5 in the Terai, 5 in the hills.
So at present, you are representing all provinces here in Nepal?
At present, we're, because the division of our geographic selection was previously done when it was development regions, and we had people in every development region. I'm sad to say at the moment we don't have work in Province 2. We have work in Sunsari Morang, just next to Province 2, where the poverty profile is very similar. But we're looking at, in our next strategy period, opening some work in Province 2 because of the urgent needs there. So we are, in that work, a lot of it is focused on, we want to leave behind really strong local civil society partners that are based locally, based in the area that they serve. And we work through them to develop their technical skills, some in education, some in health, some in livelihoods, governance, nutrition, disability. We work in a wide range of technical areas. And the two goals are to help the people who are poorest and most excluded in communities to come into the cycle of opportunity and development, and to leave behind local Nepali civil society organizations that can continue that work after UMN leaves. And finally, we do still manage 2 hospitals as well, one in Tansen and one in Okhaldunga, which is a legacy of UMN's historic work in Nepal that used to involve managing many more institutions directly ourselves.
That's really interesting, Mr. Hafvenstein. You worked most of the time there was no local government, but at the moment now we have local governments at the field. How do you see the challenges that you have faced in past, and what are the opportunities collaborating with the local government?
Yeah, I think that there are tremendous exciting opportunities around Nepal's new constitutional shift of power to the local level. I think that it's in the past, for example, as we worked to try to help ward committees work through the 14-step process of getting their priorities into government budgets, that was actually quite a lengthy and challenging process. And as authority is moving, slowly but surely, as the Constitution requires, down to the Palika level, it should be easier for local government and communities to be working effectively together to move forward local development priorities in which all are participating and all own. Of course, there's the challenge that it's a new system. It's being improvised, and the laws aren't all in place yet to facilitate that transition of authority. There's a danger, of course, that the different federal levels may all end up claiming a regulatory authority over the same kinds of activity, tripling the regulatory burden on NGOs, but also on businesses or other activities. That could be a big problem. But I'm hopeful that ultimately, as the outworking of the Constitution continues, that the 3 levels of government will find a positive division of labor, where in some cases the higher, the federal levels and the provincial levels look at a decision made at Gampalika, Nagarpalika level, and they respect that and don't add a great deal of additional regulatory burden to that. And in other cases, where the decision clearly is made at central or provincial level, and the local government follows along with that. The sooner we can articulate that new system, the easier it will be for all kinds of development work to continue.
Well, one of the major areas of your work is health system.
Oh.
I was in Bajang district a few weeks ago, and the local journalists were explaining that 2 of the remote villages, remote rural municipalities in Bajang district, many pregnant women, they die because of not having access to treatment, the delivery. How do you see the overall health system of Nepal?
In some cases, there are challenges of, despite the government's hard efforts on this point, the reality in some areas is that clinics aren't open or aren't effective for various reasons. In some areas, however, the clinics are effective, but what needs to change is demand from community members. And this is often the case with mother-child health. A significant part of UMN's work in the area of mother-child health is organizing mothers' groups of young mothers, pregnant women, and encouraging them to take advantage of antenatal checkups, postnatal checkups, and to do delivery in the health post. Because I think of, for example, in remote Rukum, another area where this is a big part of our work. Villagers have no tradition, no habit of going to the health clinic for the checkups or for delivery. And when you actually are able to get change in community demand for those services, then you see a significant improvement in mother-child health. And of course, you need to make sure then that the clinics you're directing them to are properly equipped, that everyone there is properly trained. And that's often the case. The government does have reasonably effective systems for this, but to make sure, especially in the remoter rural areas, that you identify any gaps that are there and work in partnership with local government to close them, even as you're increasing people's willingness to take advantage of them. Mental health, another area that we work in, is similar. There you often have both a relatively low level of awareness by health post workers and community attitudes that keep people from recognizing mental illness for what it is as something that can be treated medically in many cases. And so again, you need to work conjointly with the government to make sure they're ready to, the health system is ready to deliver positive outcomes, and work with the community, changing attitudes, changing habits, so that they take up the health services that are available to them.
Could you also share us with, from the experience of UMN presence here in Nepal, priority-wise, what are the key challenges, development challenges of Nepal, and how can they be addressed?
I think that something UMN, of course, encounters everywhere is the lingering impact of caste discrimination on exclusion and inclusion. And it's something that sometimes it can be so obvious that people don't even talk about it anymore. That this continues to be a bit like race in my home country of America. It's possible at various times to forget how central the experience of racial discrimination is to so many Americans. I think about work we did in Doti district, where we worked with a cooperative that had a very strong social conscience. And when I went to visit their work, they could show lots of agricultural improvements, livelihood improvements, that they'd brought to all of their members, all the cooperative members in the area. And they'd proactively gone out looking for poor community members who could be helped to become contributing cooperative members. So there were widows, there were landless households, and they'd worked with them to try to help improve their livelihoods. And when I asked, who, if anyone, have you not been able to help? Immediately they could say, well, there's the Dalit village at the bottom of the hill. They're all day laborers. They come back from day laboring, they're too tired, they don't want to come to our trainings. And ultimately, none of them have land, none of them have education. And ultimately, even this cooperative with a reasonably strong social conscience looked at that village and saw it's too hard. It is too much work to bring these people into the circle of new livelihood opportunities. And that's exactly where I see charitable nonprofit organizations, values-driven organizations like United Mission to Nepal. We need to keep a strong focus there on helping the excluded, caste is easy, but of course excluded ethnicities, religious minorities, people with disabilities, mental and physical, lots of people who are pushed to the margins. How do we help to bring them in? This is from UMN's perspective, the development challenge we keep coming back to over and over again.
Well, that's really a big challenge, despite the fact that Nepal is a state party to several international treaties,
Yeah.
including that of the Convention on Elimination of Racial Discrimination.
Yeah.
What do you think, why discrimination continues despite the fact that there are many laws, just because they are not being implemented?
Laws help and implementation helps, but it takes a long time to change social structures that go deeper than law. It takes a long time to change attitudes and mindsets. And again, I'd hasten to say this is a global challenge, and one that my own home country faces despite hundreds of years of trying to work through in different ways, and very intensively over the past century, trying to work through it in legal changes, social reforms, and still we've made lots of progress but face continuing challenges. So I think that fundamentally, when a belief has been locked in for a long time, when poor people believe that they are to blame for their poverty for some reason, and discrimination generally involves that kind of self-belief, and when people with privilege and power believe that the poor deserve to be poor, those beliefs can take a long time to change, a long time to shift people out of. And it requires work by law, but actually law is not often very effective in changing people's mindsets and attitudes. It's one factor, but you also need a strong voluntary civil society that's working to change attitudes. That's often the most effective area of belief change and attitude change. And that's one of the reasons why our fundamental strategic goal is across Nepal we want to see strong local Nepali civil society organizations that have a strong values base that includes the value of equality, the value of overcoming discrimination, because we think that's where the long process of change really moves forward.
Well, you were referring that charitable organizations face a lot of problems. One criticism is that of your organizations is that there are many resources but they are not appropriately utilized.
Yeah.
How do you ensure that the programs delivered by UMN here in Nepal are implemented with utmost transparency, be monetary or any other issues?
Yeah. So it is a fundamental challenge of international development that because of the power dynamics involved, it's true that quite a lot of money comes in and it can be spent without accountability to local people, without transparency to them, without proper consultation of them. And organizations need to have a values-based commitment that they themselves are passionate about holding themselves accountable to the people that we serve. When UMN's designing projects, we're always challenging ourselves to say, how do we take the decisions out of our hands, out of the Kathmandu office and move them to our field offices, out of our field office to our local NGO partners, out of our local partners to the community, with the vision of an empowered community making its own decisions at the heart of our design process. And then transparency, the social audit done well is a very important tool for that. Opening up, what are you spending on this project? What are the results that you can point to at local level with the local governments and the local people who can tell you whether they think you're right or not? And the local journalists as well. You mentioned in Bajang, local media. UMN's always inviting local media to come be part of our social audits and participating in reviewing the impact of our work. And we're very keen when we work with our partners to emphasize that we all want to do the most we possibly can. Many of our projects have quite small budgets, and yet we work very hard to get the most out of them in terms of impact. And that comes partly from transparency. They know that we're going to be talking openly with local government and local community about the nature of our work and about how much we're spending, and therefore we need to be transparent and accountable for the outcomes. And then at the top level, if you go to our website, you can see there our annual accounts, annual report. We work to be as transparent as we can.
Well, Mr. Hafvenstein, there are many interesting issues coming out, but we are coming to the end of the show. Do you have anything to share to our audience that I have left to ask you very quickly?
I think on the whole, I'd say this is an exciting time to be working in Nepal. It's a time when, because of the peace process persisting despite many hiccups along the way, the development of a new constitution, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for Nepal to consolidate a more inclusive, pluralist vision of the country, and the development impacts of that, if successful, will be tremendous. I suppose that one of the big risks that I see in that is that, as I mentioned before, if we end up having a system of regulation that duplicates things at multiple levels, but also one that's very focused on control from center rather than facilitation of lots of good work, that could choke off and constrain a lot of development opportunities in the civil society sector, but also in the business sector. And I'd hope it's possible to find, now that all these new laws are being passed and updated, systems of regulation that aim to facilitate good work and not overly burden organizations that are doing good work, while focusing in strongly on investigating and appropriately dealing with organizations that are abusive or break the law in any way.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. It was a pleasure talking to you.
It's a pleasure talking to you as well, Laxman. Thank you.
Dear audience, time now to wrap up the show. Keep watching us. See you next week. Namaste.